Hi YouTube, it's Kathy and this is my September 2020 reading wrap-up. If you're not already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, but today we're just talking about the books. This month I participated in Demonathon and I completed all of the prompts and the challenges, which felt great. Hopefully I can continue that success to the 5 TBRs I'm doing in October. I'm going to start with the nerdy hardcore stats and charts and then get into what I read. In September, I read 19 books and 1 short story for a total of 6,189 pages. That takes into account converting audiobook minutes to pages, so about 2,309 of those pages were actually about 64 hours of audio. The age breakdown for these books was 9 adult books, 10 YA books, and 1 middle grade book. I read 16 novels, 2 graphic novels, 1 short story, and 1 anthology. This month, the vast majority of my reading was contemporary and fantasy, with some non-fiction, science fiction, historical fiction, and horror. If you adjust by page count, you can deduce that the short story was horror. This month, almost half of my books came from the library, but I also worked on some of my own TBR for Demonathon. I read 8 audiobooks, 7 paperbacks, 4 ebooks, and 1 hardcover. Usually the largest category for page range is 300 to 399 pages, but I read more longer and shorter books this month, and had a few titles that weren't from the last decade. Most of the authors were female, with some male authors and a non-binary author as well. Most of the protagonists were female, with a few male protagonists, some dual perspective books, and some non-fiction that didn't have gendered protagonists. In terms of setting, a little over half of these books took place in the United States, but I also had reads set in the UK, other worlds, Canada, the Dominican Republic, Ireland, and Japan. In terms of diversity, I had books that were queer, dealt with race, were a combination of those 2 categories, were feminist or translated, and a couple with no prominent diversity. In terms of star ratings, this month I had 1 3-star book, 4 3.5-star books, 5 4-star books, 4 4.5-star books, and 6 5-star books. Let's start with the lowest rated read and work our way up to the highest, shall we? My 3-star read for the month was Skim. This is a graphic novel, kind of a coming-of-age graphic novel about this girl who's in high school. This one was set in 1993 in high school somewhere in Canada and mainly had to do with her interactions with her one friend, the student body, as well as this one teacher she had a crush on. This does have a relationship between her and that teacher. Whether or not it's ever fulfilled is something that would be off the page, and that is what gave me the weirdest feels. Especially because at no point did our protagonist actually come out about having this relationship with her female teacher to her one friend or the friend she made near the end of the volume. A lot of the action around the school had to do with the death of a teenage boy who used to date one of the girls at the school, and then how the school as a whole deals with it. I just felt that since at no point the relationship between the student and the teacher was addressed, this just wasn't the best thing I've ever read. On to my 3.5-star reads, I read Save the Cat by Snyder. This is a book about how to write screenplays. I picked this up years ago because it's actually the beats that my friends use for their improv troupe. They do long-form improv, but as long as you know and master kind of how a story is meant to go, you can use this for anything. And I am going to be doing NaNoWriMo next month, so I needed to figure out how to plan a novel. Especially because I'm writing that novel with another person, so we need to have a plan going into it. It'll be really hard to pants a novel with somebody else writing the other half of it. This book had a lot of great tips about story writing, but it also had a lot of navel-gazing on the author's part, and I skipped over a lot of those sections just to get to, okay, how do I write this certain type of story? The other graphic novel I read this month was Kim Reaper Grim Beginnings. This one is a graphic novel about this girl who has a crush on another girl in her university, and she decides she's gonna go ask her out, so she follows her into the hallway, and suddenly there's a portal. And it goes from there. You learn pretty quickly that the girl she has a crush on is a Grim Reaper in training. This was fun and silly and sapphic, and it would be interesting to know where it goes from here. As part of my Demonathon TBR, I read Olympian Confessions, Hades and Persephone by Erin Kinsella. This is exactly what it sounds like. It is the story of Hades and Persephone. Although I know bits and pieces of Greek myths from here and there, I don't really know the exact original story of Hades and Persephone, and they're definitely conflicting stories because there are many different interpretations as well as different retellings, so it was interesting to just go in and see the Greek myths through their lens. This one felt like it went on a little bit too long for me, but that's a me problem because I always feel like epics are too long, even though epics by definition are long. For Demonathon, I also read Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky by Kwame Mbalia. This is a middle grade book about Tristan, who is dealing with some grief over the death of his best friend that happened recently. He also recently just lost his first boxing match and has been kind of shuttled off to live with his grandparents for at least a month. A project he and his best friend had been working on was collecting oral African stories, and lo and behold, he meets one of the characters. This was a lot of fun. It had a lot of really great elements, and based on the ending, I'm really excited to see how it goes from here. My one problem with it was near the middle you get introduced to a bunch of new characters, and I wasn't always able to remember who was who. That might be a me problem though. On to my 4-star reads, the first one being Roomies by Sara, Zarr, and Tara Altebrando. This is a dual perspective novel, which is why I read it. Since I'm writing a book with another person, I wanted to read a dual perspective book. So if you have any suggestions of excellent dual perspective books, especially if they're written by two authors, please let me know down in the comments below. This book is about Elizabeth and Lauren. One of them lives in New Jersey, one of them lives in San Francisco, and they're both going to Berkeley, and they're actually going to be each other's roommates for the first year at Berkeley. When they receive correspondence from Berkeley that they are each other's roommates, they start an email correspondence back and forth, and we get to know about their lives and how they interact with each other and whether or not they think they're going to get along. This book goes through their different family dynamics. One of them is an only child and one of them is the eldest of 6 children, as well as their romantic perspectives, as well as how they deal with their parents, as well as many different things that are going on with their lives. And it was really interesting to see how it overlapped without these characters ever actually meeting physically until the very end of the book. There is a little bit of homophobia in this book, but it is mostly from a secondary character, and the primary characters kind of address it and say that that's kind of bad. Not as strongly as I would like it to, but I have a feeling that if it was written now, it would have been addressed more strongly. Next, I listened to the audiobook of Convenience Store Woman. This is about a woman who works in a convenience store in Japan and is completely content to do that. It is something that makes sense to her. Unfortunately, she has all these outside influences on her life telling her that her life isn't what it should be. For instance, if she is going to have a career, it should be something better than working in a convenience store, or she should be married. She doesn't really want either one of those things, but that is explored throughout this book. Much like The Vegetarian by Han King, this had me hating all of the characters that weren't the protagonist, because why couldn't they just leave the protagonist alone? And I think that was kind of the point. We are meant to examine what we think about what other people are doing with their lives and how it's really none of our business. I also listened to the short story Dead Air by Nino, which was published in Nightmare magazine, and then they also did a full cast narration of it, which you can find on their website. I listened to this on the very first day of the month, so some of the details are a little bit hazy, but it is a found recording story, so you're listening to these people on these recordings. And the protagonist is this girl who has these sexual relationships and then interviews the people that she sleeps with about them. That is our starting point. It gets very, very creepy from there, and if it's something that sounds interesting to you, I'll just let you listen to it yourself. I'll link it down below. Next, we have the short story collection I read this month, which was Monstrosity. This is a collection of 12 short stories, so I can't really get too far into it, but each of these stories had different aspects of evil, whether it be a situation of evil or a person who is evil, whether that be the protagonist or there's a villain in it. It played with the idea of what is considered a monster. If you're looking for a creepy short story collection for the month, this is a good one to pick up. Something else I read this month that was deeply atmospheric was Perfectly Preventable Deaths by Deirdre Sullivan. This one takes place in Ireland, and it's about these twins whose mother has just recently remarried, so they are moving home to this very small town in which they will live in a castle. That sounds all happy or whatnot until you realize that a lot of girls have gone missing from this area. Additionally, the girls are finding it a little bit difficult to make friends. They have people that will talk to them, but it's hard to make actual friendships because this town seems very tight-knit. This got creepy and weird. There were elements of magic, and our protagonist does realize she's queer during the course of this book. This is a book that has been on my wish list for ages because I've seen a couple of people talk about it and really, really love it, so I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to read it. On to my 4.5 star reads, the first one being Of Curses and Kisses by Sandia Menon. This was the first in the series, and going into it I didn't know that much about it, so I definitely didn't know it was a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Our Beauty is a princess from India, our Beast is a nobleman from the UK, and they meet up in a boarding school in Colorado. There's a lot of animosity between these two characters' families who have been fighting for centuries, and because of this, our main character decides that she is going to make this guy fall in love with her so she can break his heart. Obviously, that doesn't make her sound very relatable at all, but by the end of this, you do really love this character for how much she loves her sister. You also come to realize pretty quickly that he is not a bad guy. Since this is a first in a series set at this boarding school, I'm wondering if the rest is going to be a companion series with different retellings. I haven't looked into it, but I'm excited to go into the next one not knowing. Next, I read Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is about two different girls, one who lives in America, one who lives in the Dominican Republic, and they both share a father, which is a fact they did not know until after he dies in a plane crash. The father spent the majority of his time in the United States, but would go away for business to the Dominican Republic for 3 months out of the year, and that's the time that he was spending with his daughter that lives there. This is dual perspective, so we get to know about both of these characters, how they grew up, what their lives are like in their respective places, and it's also written in verse, so it is very quick to get through. I enjoyed that the structure of the words on the page changed depending on which character we were reading from, and it was quite easy to just open to a page and be like, oh, it's this character or this character based on how many lines are in a stanza. This was incredibly hard-hitting because it had a lot to do with grief, and there were also mentions of sexual assault as well as an attack on the page. But this also had very casual queer representation, which I very much enjoyed. Another queer book I very much enjoyed was Darius the Great Deserves Better by Adib Khurram. This is the follow-up to Darius the Great is Not Okay, and it takes place when he's back in the United States and he's in high school. At this point he has a boyfriend, but there's this other boy that is kind of catching his eye and he doesn't understand why, since he already has a boyfriend. This has to do with the fact that he is being continuously bullied by this guy at school who happens to be best friends with a guy that he is sort of becoming friends with, and he can't understand why this guy he likes so much is friends with this guy who is so mean to him. It also has to do with his family. Both of his parents are working very, very hard, and his dad ends up having to work far away from home, which is hard on him. It also has to do with his sister Lale, who is being bullied in school by racists. And then it also has to do with his grandparents and his best friend back in Iran. Even though there was a lot going on in this book, it didn't feel like it was too much for one book, and it was interesting to see these different dynamics he had with different people in his life. My last 4.5-star read was a reread of The Diviners by Libba Bray. I really had fun with this. When I first read these books, I read most of them as audiobooks. For some reason, my library doesn't have the third one as an audiobook, so I'm pretty sure I read that one as an ebook. And it was interesting to revisit these characters from the beginning. If you aren't familiar with this series, it takes place primarily in New York in the 1920s and has to do with a cast of characters that have special powers called diviners. It is very creepy and atmospheric, and right from the beginning you know that there's going to be a supernatural big bad. Like I said before, I just loved being reintroduced to these characters, and I'm looking forward to rereading the entire series. On to my 5-star reads, the first one being Kindred for the Octavia E. Butler slow read-along, in which we are reading all of her works over about 2 years. This is a book I had sort of read before in that I read the graphic novel adaptation a few years ago, so I knew the general story, but going back and actually reading this was very beneficial. This book is about a black woman named Dana who is living with her white husband, and they are moving into their new house, and one day she feels a little bit dizzy, and then suddenly she is sucked back into time to see this boy drowning in a river, and she saves his life. However, these white folks now think that she is endangering their child, her life is threatened, and then she goes back to her present. What follows is a series of moments where she has to travel back in time against her will over and over and over to defend this one boy as he grows up, and she comes to realize that he is part of her lineage. I feel slightly out of place saying this as a white person, but my understanding of this book is that it is an excellent metaphor for interracial dating and what it's like to be a black person in America, because you can be going about your day and then all of a sudden somebody says something racist or there's a microaggression and you are taken back in time to when people were enslaved. Sometimes you have allies who are willing to listen to what those experiences are, and sometimes you have people in your life that completely ignore your lived experiences, as well as the historical context of your life. We must be getting near the end of this video because my camera battery is about to die. I'll be right back. This is essential sci-fi reading, and I'm very excited to continue reading her works. Next we have a book that I read in less than 24 hours, and that's The Roommate. The setup of this book is our protagonist is in her mid to late 20s. She's just finished all of the college and university that she's going to do, and she's She's moving across the country to move in with this friend that she's had a crush on since high school. When she arrives, he says, "Hey, at the last minute my band got this gig and I'm actually going to be away for 3 months, but I've rented out my room to somebody else." You come to find out within the first couple of chapters that that somebody else is an adult performer. What follows is some very sex-positive, adult fun times. We also get his perspective, especially about what it's like to work in the adult entertainment industry, and I just loved this book. I could not put it down. This is a debut novel, and I am already excited for her next book that is coming out next year. This month I also listened to This Is My America by Kim Johnson. This is about a girl whose father has been in jail for the last 7 years for a crime that he did not commit, and she writes weekly, if not more frequent, letters to this organization that is meant to take on death row cases and see if they can overturn them. As the clock is ticking down to her father's execution date, her brother is also accused of a crime he does not commit. This is about racism, microaggressions, and double standards, because if a white man was accused of killing a bunch of people and his family said he was home, he would be believed, but it's not the case for this black man. This is incredibly hard-hitting. As it says in the blurb, it is Dear Martin meets Just Mercy, and it was a fascinating, fantastic, powerful read. Next on my list is Loveless by Alice Oseman. This is an Arrow Ace coming-of-age story about this girl who has a chance to have her first kiss between high school and university, and nopes right out of that situation. She doesn't initially understand why, but then she goes to university, makes some friends, learns what being Arrow Ace is, realizes that's her, and this is all about the friendships that she has within this story, and it's so wonderful. Her and her friends are also performing in a medley of Shakespeare scenes, and just the scenes that Alice Oseman chose to highlight fit perfectly with what's happening with the plot of the book, and I just absolutely loved that. This also pointed out and tackled ace and non-binary phobia, and I absolutely loved it for that. If you're looking for a book about the strength of platonic friendships and how important they are, this is one to pick up. My penultimate book this month is Policing Black Lives by Robin Maynard. This is a book about the black lives of people who live specifically in Canada, which I really wanted to read because that is where I live. And going into this, I knew that Canada has a pretty great public relations when it comes to racism, in that people think that it happened here a long time ago, but it's not present now. And I also knew that that was very inaccurate. This book gives you the hard facts about how Black people have been treated in Canada and how they continue to be treated, and how it is even more difficult if you're at the intersection of gender or sexual identity or disability. Racism is not just an American problem as much as we'd like to think that it is. As much as there are policies going into place that are of aid, we still need to do better. This is one of those books where I'd love to have my own copy so I can continue to go over it and internalize these statistics, because I find it is very important to know and remember exactly how much this country has been against Black folks from the beginning. My favorite book this month was Pulp by Robin Talley. This is an incredibly bibliophilic book, and obviously I loved it for that, but it is also hella queer. This is dual perspectives between a high school student in 2017 who has to do a creative writing project, and a woman who has recently graduated high school in 1955. In these dual timelines, each of them discovers lesbian pulp, and each of them starts reading lesbian pulp, and each of them starts writing their own lesbian pulp. This had absolutely wonderful parallels between what it was like to be queer back in the 1950s versus what it's like to be queer in the present era, and all of the social justice movements that it's taken to get us from there to here. This also has to do with both of their family lives as well as their own romantic entanglements, and I just really enjoyed this so much. It's very easy for folks these days to look at novels from the 1950s and be like, well, these are just terrible because all of them end badly, but then you have the historical context of the fact that they had to end badly, otherwise they wouldn't be published. There were certain rules about that. And that in part is why it is so empowering to have queer stories that have happy endings. If you love queer fiction or you love books about books, you will absolutely love this book. If you want to hear me talk more about these books, or other books for that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always listed down below. If you've read any of these, please let me know what you think about them down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you're on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I recently set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as well as my PayPal and my Amazon wishlist, are all down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye. Bye!